Hi, my name's Phil Craig. I'm a writer, a TV producer, a lover of stories, and a connoisseur of scandal. And I'm on a mission to bring you the most scandalous tales ever told. So thanks for joining me here at the Scandal Mongers podcast. Well, thanks for joining me once more. Phil Craig, Scandal Mongers podcast, the Australian bar, back home to everything that's familiar and warm and reassuring, with a tale to tell. Quite a few tales to tell. In fact, you'll remember I started last week's episode. Those of you, and a lot of you did, who joined me on my balcony in Madeira when I introduced the wonderful Caroline Heiresses, who was proved to be a great hit, and is definitely coming back. Anyway, those of you who did join me, showing off my lovely view of beautiful Madeira in the sunshine. Everything seemed to be going swimmingly well on my holiday, but those of you who follow me on Twitter, X, will know that things took a turn. Basically, my mother-in-law, Jennifer, I was talking about her and Frances, the two naughty girls I was on holiday with. She fell, and at 86, the fall is serious, and we all felt really bad about that. And it was one of those very British situations where she was saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've spoiled your holiday." We're saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, we should never have brought you." "Oh, no, it's fine. I was looking forward to it." What can you do? Falls do happen. She knew the hotel really well. She'd been there several times, well, every year for the last 3 years, in fact. And she was very happy pottering around most days by herself with a stick, finding inappropriate gentlemen to have coffee with. And we used to tease her about that as well. And then one evening, we were going out for dinner. It just slipped. And there, within a few seconds, fractured pelvis. Ambulance comes, taken to this lovely private hospital in Madeira. Doctors are incredibly nice. Lots of scans. Apparently, there are good ways and bad ways of fracturing your pelvis. I'm sure there's not a good way, really, but there are worse ways. And she had one of the better ones. It's in the middle, not the side. There's less weight on it. I don't know, really, but basically, she doesn't need surgery, doesn't need plaster. 4 to 6 weeks of rest, bit of physiotherapy should be okay, but and a lot of pain. And it's always very distressing, I think, to be ill abroad when you don't really speak the language. But the hospital was wonderful. The insurance company was wonderful. You all hear these horror stories. We were so lucky. Everything was really smooth. British Airways were great. The airport people were great, both in Madeira and Gatwick. Kindness of strangers everywhere. Wheelchair assistants. Going into the plane on a lift, it looked like they were going to put her in the hold. So don't put her in the hold. No, they lift them up the side and they go in the side door, the door that they hardly ever open. Well, now I know where they do open it. They open it for people on wheelchairs. So getting it in and out of the plane was painful for her and difficult, but everybody was great. Got home, got her upstairs. That was quite a challenge. Into bed. Then, of course, the NHS, which is going through its normal winter crisis. So we were a bit anxious what would happen. But you know what? We rang her GP. Within 3 hours, a doctor was by her bedside. Absolutely lovely bloke, completely professional, very, very nice bedside manner. Prescribed her all her pills, reviewed all the Portuguese notes, made her a plan, got in touch with the home care team. Within another hour, somebody turned up to fit a lockbox so that carers could come and go. I mean, we were obviously looking after her, but at some point we'll need to leave her for a while. So carers are going to visit. They're bringing her a walker. We've manoeuvred her in and out the bed a few times. And tomorrow, with the doctor's approval, we're going to try and get her down the stairs into a wheelchair to the local pub to meet our son and his kids for a Christmas get-together, which she's looking forward to. So, not a happy ending, but not a bad ending either. She's in good hands. But there you go. Phil's holiday experiences, which also explains what's on Phil's bar, which is, wait for it, of course, duty-free bag. Yes, we took a moment to get the duty-free. Sorry, Jennifer. Frances was left in charge, and we did get into the lounge, so that was all very nice. Yeah, Duke of Clarence, reference to Shakespeare there, I think. Was he drowned in a butt of Malmsley, which I think is Madeira? Any Shakespeare scholars, please pop me right. Yeah, Blandis, Madeira, other Madeiras are available, etc., etc. That's going to help us with the Christmas. Bit of it goes in the Christmas gravy, and a lot of it goes into the Christmas host, namely Mrs. Craig, and myself. And Jennifer will be joining us. But we haven't actually decorated the house yet because we haven't had time. Too much time ferrying old ladies up and down steps. But, like I say, the kindness of strangers and the NHS still delivering for all its problems. And you never have to worry about your insurance because we don't have it. When people do in Britain, and sometimes it's valuable. But in our experience, in our life so far, touch wood, the NHS has always been there for us. So there we are. I don't know what the political message of all that is. I know it can do with reform. And I think sometimes it's run in the interests of the trade unions rather than the patients, blah, blah, blah. But it still delivers. It's there when you need it. It was certainly there for us yesterday. Yeah, so no political ranting this week, just me reminiscing, or rather updating you on my holiday and the various emergencies. It was lovely. We had such a great time. Even after the accident, Jennifer said, "Oh, you must go out." Because in hospital, we could leave her for a few hours. And I was, of course, getting notes and comments on the program with Carolyn. And that was really interesting. A lot of you were very generous, actually. They noticed that we were in Madeira, and a few people had given little donations and said, "You need to spend this on a drink for Mrs. Craig and Jennifer." So very, very, very kind people out there. Who do I thank? All that fluff and stuff in beautiful Queensland. The Whitsundays, I think. Oh my goodness. Here's a donation for Mrs. Craig. I'd refer you to get her a 6-pack of 150 lashes. That's beer. No, I'm sorry, I didn't do that. What I did was I used that money, and indeed money from other generous people. Thank you, Minook, Carolyn McGovern, Alison Kent, lots of people who gave us little donations, and we got this. Can you see? There we are. A Kia Royale in the garden of our hotel in Mrs. Craig, courtesy of the Scandal Mongers audience. Isn't that beautiful? So, yeah. And I'll share one more picture with you, because I mentioned that we play bridge. One of the fun things we do is that we play bridge on our holidays. So even when Jennifer was in hospital, we thought we'd took the cards in. There we go. Portuguese hospital. Oh, messages coming in. Portuguese hospital, Frances and her mum and me playing bridge. Yeah. Even in adversity. Family is everything. Yeah, more lovely messages. I should talk comment of the month time. That's next week, but I'm going to read a few because I like doing that. Toronto 4640 has travel advice. Madeira is also becoming the place for many Canadians to spend the winter. We always love going to Madeira, and it's much better value than Florida. Surprised about that, but that's good. It's a wonderful place. I do recommend it. Our friend Marion Douglas, Danger Kitty Films. And Marion, I got an email. Your mug is in the mail. I think it's finally left Britain. Sorry it's so slow. It's Christmas post. Yeah, Marion got the mug last month. Marion enjoyed Caroline Harris and would love, she says in capital letters, would love to hear her stories on Marie Antoinette. Well, that is going to happen. More comments from our old friend Susan Marg. I'm not saying you're old, Susan, but you are an old friend. Susan Marg of Possum Management, domestic violence among possum correspondent. That's what you are. That was a great show. Thanks. I did not know that their daughter Charlotte lived long enough to marry. Blah, blah, blah. Lots and lots to enjoy. And enjoyed the suggestive hedges. Now, I don't know if this is going to get me banned from the internet, but one of the things I'd actually managed to mention on the introduction was we had to see these hedges, and the girls were making suggestive comments because, behaving like a bunch of teenagers. I mean, really, nothing in the least bit rude about that, is there? Perfectly normal kind of a hedge. Anyway, there you are. Your topiary correspondent, Phil and Francis Craig and Jennifer Bryant. What else? Lots of things. Lots of things from lots of people. Tina Jessie, 859, talking of Phil's Australian bar. Yeah, hi, Tina. I think you've commented before. She says, am I alone to notice, am I the only person to notice that since Andrew left the podcast, Phil's taken to drink? Well, actually, Andrew quite likes to drink, I have to be honest. And in fact, we dreamt up this podcast in the Chelsea Arts Club, where he's frequently found at lunchtime, seeking inspiration over lunch. But yeah, I do talk about the bar a lot because it's nice. It's a nice background, and yeah, it allows me to talk a little bit about my life, my family, and stuff like that. That isn't necessarily scandalous. It has its scandalous moments, but is quite a nice way into some of the more serious content that we do. And now onto the content. Laura's back. Like Caroline, many of you have loved Laura. She's been on the show. Is it 3 times or is it two? I think it's 3 times. Lord Lucan, one of our early shows, and her very different theories about Lord Lucan. That's worth checking out. She's a fantastic writer, Laura. We became friends with her too because she actually came and gave a talk at Francis's Library and got a huge crowd. That was about Agatha Christie, but she's written about Agatha Christie too and talked about it on the pod. And she also talked about the Mitford sisters. That was really good. Insights into the Mitfords. Just the way she writes. It's very poetic, but also journalistic. It's kind of a nice mix of literary style and good journalism, which I think distinguishes her work. And if I'm honest, I think I'm trying to copy a few elements of Laura's work in my own book, which if any of you ever end up reading, you can tell me if I succeeded or not. All right, I'll have more to say about this and that, but I might have to open this Madeira. I'll come back to you after we've heard from the lovely Laura. Thanks for being with me once again, and bye. Laura, welcome back.
It's lovely to see you again, Phil.
Well, here's the Australian bar. You're going to be a physical presence at the bar in a couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to that.
Eyeing up what I'm going to have, actually.
Well, there's quite a few bottles of Madeira we just brought back from our holidays. Look, they're in their little protective wrappers for the plane.
Okay, well, you can crack one of those open for a start, and then we'll move on from there.
Sounds like a great plan. Heiresses. Goodness me. I've flattered you so much about your writing style, but you do produce sentences I just love to quote back at you. Women with time on their hands and mistrust in their hearts. That's such a lovely line.
Well, that's very nice of you, Phil. I mean, it really does mean a lot. And that, I don't actually remember writing that, but that's not bad as a summation for what these women were on the whole, actually. And because money in itself is not an interesting subject. I mean, who cares, what they could buy or anything. But the effect on their lives and the disconnect between what their lives should have been and what they actually were, that did interest me a lot.
It's a very underexplored area. And often, as you say yourself, in literature, they're sort of portrayed as villains sometimes.
Well, you have to, otherwise, I mean, yeah, I start by talking about Pride and Prejudice because the figure of Anne de Bour has always fascinated me. This silent, totally passive sort of, who's en face with Elizabeth, effectively, who will get Darcy.
She's lined up for Darcy, isn't she?
Absolutely. But you feel this, you almost feel the weight of what I call in the book the heiress's burden on this girl, that she has no agent, whereas Elizabeth is all agency. And in some strange way, you feel it's connected to the freedom that comes with not having so much money because it's not her destiny, must be found elsewhere. So I do use Austen quite a lot, also with regard to Lydia, because the whole elopement thing, once they, when they tried to clamp down on making it so easy to abscond with heiresses, but of course you could still go to Gretna Green and all that sort of thing. And so Jane Austen was a great reference point, unsurprisingly. But yes, I couldn't think of a happy heiress from Agatha Christie through Henry James, Washington Square, the superb, The Heiress's Burden in a Nutshell, that beautiful book. Austen, Jean Rhys, White's SOC, The Woman in White. I kept coming. It's so interesting.
I want to go through all these slowly because it's also an amazing way to tell the history of, marriage, divorce, women's rights, all kind of social changes and even parliamentary action flow from some of these stories. But just to go back to poor old Anne de Bour, there she is with her pushy mother. She's got no real character of her own, doesn't seem to be very witty. And it's just like, I guess she doesn't need to have a character because she's got all this money.
Well, that's it. That's it. And when they tried to direct the course of their lives, that's even worse. I say in the book something like, it was better to have money, except when it wasn't. Because for a woman, because the book is, as you very kindly sort of have implied, the book, I wanted to make it more than just, as I say, money. It's not interesting in itself. But women and money, and how it became almost like a story of the evolution of women towards some sort of semblance of equality. And it's all that writ large, really, because if a woman had money and no power and no legal identity once she married, that really was a recipe for some serious disasters, as I tell in the book.
Well, another quote, actually, I don't know whether it's you or somebody's quoting, you're quoting someone else, but you say men were gaslighting heiresses before the word gaslight, or indeed gaslight itself was even invented.
Well, that's right. No, that I'm going to claim that one as well.
You should. Well, let's start with an actual story, because I'd never heard of Mary Davis.
No.
And yet, I mean, you'll tell the story at your own way, but, you know, she actually explains why London is London.
Yeah, it is an unbelievable story. I mean, at one point I wanted to write a book just about Mary, but because, again, like Anne de Burgh, although earlier, because she was born in the year of the plague, wasn't she? 1665. And by the weirdest means, really, she inherited this chunk of London, which was then marshland, and now is sort of Mayfair and Belgravia. And even back then, it was known to have value. And she had a terrible mother. I mean, worse than Lady Catherine de Burgh, by some measure, who would sort of parade her around Hyde Park to various suitors who would put in bids for her. Somebody thought, oh yeah, I've got a bit of Piccadilly and that'll work really well with Mary Davis. So he put in a bid, but that
she's she's only 14 or something, isn't she? She's quite young.
She was married at 12.
12.
12, but she'd been paraded around from 8 or whatever.
Oh my God.
And was eventually sold to a Grosvenor, and that is why you have the Dukes of Westminster.
Grosvenor Square, perhaps the most expensive real estate in Europe, some of it.
Absolutely. She is, as I say, something like she was the end of the Monopoly board. I mean, that was what she, by absolutely extraordinary default, it was her great uncle had been a moneylender to both sides in the English Civil War. And by these mysterious means, it came to her. But anyway, so she was married off to Grosvenor. He was fine. There was nothing wrong with him. He was perfectly nice. But this is what I was saying earlier, when you tried to strike out for yourself, how disastrous the consequences were, because she had no concept of what agency was, which would have been true for most women, but because they're only defined by what they own, it's almost like they don't evolve as she tried to strike out by she converted to Roman Catholicism at a time when that was really not politically a terribly good idea, because her husband was trying to court favour with William of Orange and et cetera, et cetera. It was just a disaster. He then died. She got tangled up with a priest who had a rather sexy brother, and ended up going to Paris with these people on a sort of pilgrimage. And what happened to her? Well, I kept thinking of her actually with this whole terrible Giselle Pellico story. This idea of a woman being not just everything taken from her, but her bodily autonomy taken from her. And that is effectively what happened to Mary. It is a true horror story. It's kind of Bram Stoker, Samuel Richardson.
So she's abused, she's raped in Paris.
And then while she's out for the count in the sort of early 18th century equivalent of Rohypnol, she came around to find that she was married. She was married to the sexy brother of the priest. And oh, hey presto, now the sexy brother owns the 1,000 acres of extremely valuable marshland. And it was a court case that went on for years and years and years. And what was interesting was public sympathy was quite often with the man who was going after this stuff that he had no right to have. Because, of course, winding back slightly, once a woman married then, and until quite late in the 19th century, you had no legal identity. There was only him. The woman and the man were one. They were one identity, which was his. So the property was his. This was the terrible trap that a lot of these girls fell into. Because catching an heiress became a sort of Georgian sport, really. But she was the supreme example of it. And then in the end was declared insane. The court case got the property back in the end, and he melted away. The monstrous pretender to her fortune melted away, admitted it hadn't been a real marriage, etc., etc. But nevertheless, she was placed in the sort of the equivalent of confinement, which again was something that quite often happened to these women, so that she wasn't ill-treated or anything, but so that the property, which was really all she ever was, so that the property could be developed and was no longer at risk from her on a whim, marrying someone or something like that. And then you get the foundations of Grosvenor Square start to be laid down right at the end of her life. And so the story went on that direction. But she is every bad thing that could happen to an heiress. That is her story. It is like the Uber story, really.
You mentioned that a lot of there were quite a few cases of catching heiresses, literally kind of abducting them, marrying them, whether they were kind of temporarily giving consent or they just didn't even bother to ask for consent. A priest would marry them, perhaps they were drunk or drugged, and then suddenly that was it. And that led to, I didn't know until I'd read your book, actually, that's why we have the reading of the banns in a marriage still today.
Yes.
Explain how that happened.
Well, there was this roaring trade in what they called clandestine marriages. And people like, the Earl of Rochester tried, in fact, he did achieve one. So this is, and Pepys is full of this stuff. There were certain venues where you could go and be married, what they called clandestine. And then there was this almost hilarious roaring trade in dodgy priests who would do it in the sort of environs of the Fleet prison. That was a good place to get married because you could pay them and they would do it. It is so extraordinary. But the banns thing was some sort of clamp on that kind of thing. By degrees, they put clamps. The big Marriage Act in 1753 put an end to the worst of the kind of abductions, but it didn't include Scotland, hence Gretna Green.
Hence Gretna Green, of course. The midnight carriage ride across the border for the quick marriage. Because reading the banns basically puts a time delay. It gives people a chance to object in public, and it builds in a 3 or 4 week delay between the proposal and the actual wedding.
Yes, exactly so. Thank you for explaining that.
Some people might not know. I don't actually know whether internationally it's still, is it a very Church of England thing, or is it the Catholics sign up for it too? I don't even know.
No, that I don't know. I do not know that, but it's, yes, exactly so. It was to try and halt because if you could do this in a rush, like the story of the girl who was literally seized off the street and taken to a house on the Strand. And again, it's like something out of The Handmaid's Tale. All these women on her, preparing her for this fake marriage and all this sort of thing. But they risked, some of the, you have tales of people being hanged for doing this. They took a huge risk.
The men?
The men or the women who colluded, because quite often they had a woman who would lure the girl in. They would team up in that way. But as I say in the book, it was a gambler's society, and the gap between rich and poor was fathomless. And people thought it was worth the risk. And there were quite a lot of MPs who did it. What a surprise. They were the lords, who obviously it was their daughters. They wanted the law to be changed and made more, the whole thing to be calmed down. But the Commons were quite keen on this heiress catching malarkey, because then you could fund a career.
Good Lord.
Not saying they'd still do that now, but
Well, I want to. We could talk about the early parts of the book for ages. I mean, I do want to get ahead to penis-shaped pepper grinders. You'll forgive me for going there with the Ruby Rosa. We'll get there in the end. But
Oh God, him. Oh my
before
goodness.
we get to him, I mean, I guess the golden age of the heiress perhaps would be the American heiresses. We're rushing
Yes.
forward a good century now, but that was quite a moment too, wasn't it, for men, often European, pursuing women who are rich and often American.
Yes. The deal was you got the roof fixed at Blenheim Palace and she got a title, which was the one thing she couldn't have in America, as it were. The supreme example of this, these American girls coming over, the dollar princesses, that's what they were called. So the supreme example of that is Consuelo Vanderbilt marrying the Duke of Marlborough, which was very unhappy. But for so in 1870 and 1882, you had these Married Women Property Acts, which did mark the end of one half of this story, really. The early story of the book is a kind of what do women do when they can't get any sort of equality in law, and all the judges are on the man's side and most of the public are on the man's side. And there is this sense that for women to have this sort of money is almost a wrong in itself that needs righting societally. So that part of the book comes to an end with these Married Women's Property Acts, which is very interesting how they became, instituted. But then we move on to the thing you're talking about. The next part of the book is these dollar princesses. And because aristocratic wealth was no longer so limitless as it had appeared to be for various reasons, which I needn't go into now, but the value of land and blah blah blah, and a title and wealth were not necessarily synonymous in the way they had been. And so these girls who were coming over, I suppose the first of them was Jenny Jerome, the mother of Winston Churchill. She couldn't get into New York society. She couldn't get right into it, the what they called the 400 of Caroline Astor. And then my source, incredibly helpful source, was Edith Wharton and the whole Age of Innocence, that society that's portrayed in that book, and that it's sort of like an imitation of England, really. And yet America represented so much more. But there is this, at the heart of New York society, there was this phenomenally correct, as I'm sure everybody knows, headed by Caroline Astor. And so people who couldn't get into it, like the Jeromes, he was a Wall Street broker. I mean, he was as rich as Croesus, but they couldn't get into that. So they came to Europe. They would go to France, go and have a jolly time and get some marvelous clothes and learn sophisticated ways. And then they would come to England and get all the best men, really. I mean, certain society ladies were absolutely panic-stricken. These lovely, fun girls dressed in Worth who were coming over, and naturally all the men liked them, and including the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VII. He loved them, and he sort of facilitated their entry into society.
Well, there's some colourful stories. I mean, there's Daisy Fellows seems to be quite a character.
Oh, well, she's a bit later.
Is she? So sorry.
Yeah, but she's smashing, isn't she? She's the sewing machine heiress.
Unlike many of the women in your book, she seems to at least enjoy her life.
Well, there were a handful who enjoyed it. There was the marvellous one, whom I adore because I like horse racing, Dorothy Paget, who owned a Derby winner, which is a sort of, I'd give a year of my life to do. And she had a marvelous time. She just spent it all on horses, and would ring up her bookmaker at sort of 4 a.m. and place bets on races that had already been run. She was a real eccentric. She was also a lesbian, which, interestingly, that was that could be a kind of safety net.
Yeah, I think sorry about the echo. I think you say that some of the happiest heiresses were actually secretly lesbians, and they were able to contract these lavender marriages with probably with gay men, and then live, a semi-public life with their female partner.
Exactly so. And Daisy Fellows, that's who she inherited from, Winnaretta Singer, who was she was the sewing machine heiress. I mean, he had so many children, Singer, but she got a huge fortune, and she became. And then, so we're now moving into the early 20th century, and some of these women actually started to do interesting things with their money. And Winnaretta became a really serious patron of the arts. She had this extraordinary house in Paris, with the drawing room the size of a car park. And in there would come Fauré and Poulenc and, all these, and Ravel, and she was their patron, which in those days you obviously needed. And she was the first one I can think of who actually, well, no, there is an earlier one, but that's like a coda. But they started to do things that were sort of either more interesting or more worthwhile. But not all of them. What interested me was even when they had, in the eyes of the law, control of these fortunes, a lot of them still almost willfully screwed up. And that really did interest me.
Because they just wanted a sensation in their life, or they just didn't feel sort of connected to the men that they'd been forced or coerced into marrying? Or?
Well, it's a big question. I sort of try and tease it out in the introduction to this book because I tried to think, what is it like? All right, so if Mary Davis is the uber heiress of the early part of the book, then the one in the second part of the book really is Barbara Hutton, the Woolworth heiress, she was very good looking, she was ridiculously rich, of course, and in the 30s really, she came out in society, and she had 7 marriages, which became increasingly ridiculous, increasingly, you feel almost willfully ridiculous. And you almost get this sense with Barbara of a kind of, I don't know whether it's a kind of existential guilt at what she had. And, if she met you and you said, oh, that's nice, what a lovely watch, she'd just say, have it. And she paid the man, she paid her friends, and in the end she ended up with nothing. Body racked by drink and drugs, and so I became very, very interested in these women who should have. I think it was Noel Coward who said, her money is always between her and happiness. And you there's you getting an electricity bill and thinking, oh God, how am I going to pay this? And there's a part of me that would think, oh, come on, enough with the existential misery, get on with it, enjoy yourself. But they just couldn't. And I could only think that it's partly the Washington Square thing of, how does Catherine Sloper ever know that she is loved for herself? This man wants to marry her for her money. Her father doesn't want him to marry her for her money. But what else is she? What else? What is their internal worth when they've got so much that's external? And you sort of feel that starts to plague them. How am I ever going to be valued for myself? What am I other than this money? And this lack of context in their life. If I knew I was going away in January or something, I'd be really excited about that. I'd be saving up. I'd be thinking that, but nothing. Every day is like this procession of the same luxury. How do you fill the hours? What has any meaning? There feels like this quest for meaning in their life, and there feels like this quest for love for themselves because that will give them meaning. And they're almost hungry for the sensation of need, which they cannot experience. And so I tried to tease all that out in the introduction because it's quite difficult. But I was trying to put myself in the position of people who literally do not know anything different than this weight of wealth. Which right now sounds pretty great to me, but with them, it has no context. It has no beginning or end, or they haven't earned it. What do they do to give their lives meaning and shape?
No, it's so interesting. And I think you say also in the book that just the very word heiress is one of those glamour words. Even the most ordinary thing, you put the word heiress in the sentence, it's like, oh, that's exciting. Heiress kidnapped, heiress eloped, heiress found dead, heiress admitted to clinic. It's like, ooh, what's going on there? And
That's
that's
right.
what they are. But they're also, of course, targets. Even long after the age of Gretna Green, these playboy gigolos lurk. And I'm sorry, I'm going to get to poor, how do I say it? Porfirio Rubirosa, who is either every heiress's dream or every heiress's nightmare. But he was entangled with Barbara Hutton too, wasn't he?
Yes, and Doris Duke. I worked out that Barbara was married to him for about 5 minutes. Well, it cost her $66,000 a day to pay him off. That was how long the marriage lasted and what he got out of her. And he'd got, I don't know, quite a lot out of Doris Duke already, the tobacco heiress. So Barbara knew that. She knew about Doris Duke. They were pretty much of an age. Why would you marry Rubirosa, who had cavorted with Zsa Zsa Gabor and
he drove a sports car. He played polo. He was handsome. He was notoriously well endowed. In fact, the pepper grinders are still called Rubirosas in some restaurants. Did you know that in Paris? It's a true story. This is true. They say, "I'll bring the Rubirosa," and they bring out this pepper. That's what they do. So yeah, he was famously kind of like a party boy, but utterly and completely unreliable.
Completely. Well, he defined that very 50s concept of the playboy. And I think I likened him to the sort of 60s rock star groupie. He's and there is an element of decision on the part of these women. I mean, in a sense, they're the ones with the power because he is, in a sense, the supplicant.
They are the rock stars.
That's right. They don't have to marry this guy, whatever the pepper grinder dimensions. I mean, so he basically made a career out of that. But he was nice looking and everything. But it was almost like, how sometimes when you're in a gang of people and they all decide to fall in love with the same person or something like that, and then it becomes like a little thing amongst people or a little competition. You slept with Rubirosa. Okay, well, and he went along for the ride, and you do feel he sort of had a sense of fun about him or whatever. I mean, the earlier ones, some of these men that the women married in the earlier stories, like the one that Thackeray's Barry Lyndon is based on. I mean, the man at the center of that, he makes Rubirosa look like, Prince William in his demeanor and what have you. I mean, this was a bad man, this Andrew Stoney guy who married, in fact, an ancestor of the late Queen. Through the mother's side. She was a Bowes Lion, this woman. She was a rich widow, really, really rich widow, and she should have known better. But they must have all been like Rubirosa, these men. They must have had what I call in the book a rock star gleam about them, that these women, and a confidence that these women who really should have known better would fall for them. And I mean, what he did to this woman, he put a needle in her tongue to make her sign away the tiny little bit that she'd kept from him, and so this is all in Thackeray, a sort of modified version of it, or a jollier version of it. he ended up in prison, but it didn't seem to make a lot of difference being in prison then. He still married the warder's daughter and had about 5 children with her. And all. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Oh, and there's very modern elements to these stories. He made his wife write her confessions and then kept it with the idea that he might sell it to the papers. It's very modern sort of, as a sort of blackmail over her and that kind of thing.
Well, let's talk a bit more modern, because I'm conscious of the time, and also, heiresses haven't gone away, and again, they all seem to some pretty high profile and happy and controversial ones in the last few decades. I guess the Maxwell story would be one of them.
Yes, absolutely. Because I sort of end the book with the thought that, in a sense, the end of this story is the prenup, in a sense. But it isn't, as you say, it isn't really. I mean, whether Gillian Maxwell, but she's called an heiress. That's the interesting thing, the way this word is attached as what you were saying earlier, this kind of signifier of privilege, and this rather Scott Fitzgerald creature who drifts through life, but then doom is almost waiting for her because she's been given too many gifts by the gods. So yes, that there are still these stories, and you still get women murdered for their money, and all this kind of thing. But of course, you now have, well, not that woman, no, not Maxwell, but the women who just have money have better lawyers, and they're not in the situation of Barbara Hutton or Christina Onassis or but Christina Onassis, that was really what drew me to this story, thinking about a woman like that, who I remember as a kid and sort of thinking, why do you look so sad? Why do you look so, why can't you enjoy why can't you enjoy?
Tell us a little more about Christina, because I'm not sure that many people will know much about her life.
Well, just that she was the daughter of Aristotle Onassis, Greek shipping magnate, who ended up marrying Jackie Kennedy. And she lost, it really is like the House of Atreus, this story. She lost her mother, she lost her brother. She ended up sort of as a figure within that shipping empire, sort of, working with a position. But she also had this terrible vulnerability. Again, you can sort of see the desire to be loved in her eyes. Her eyes look so vulnerable, and marrying, the usual procession of blatant fortune hunters. It's like, and this is what I was trying to tease out in the book, the psychology of it. And then she died very young. What I remember about her was she lived off about 50 cans of Diet Coke a day to try and lose weight. And
what did she die of?
Heart attack. She looked very unhealthy. But because money is now, I suppose, what rank used to be in the time of Shakespeare, it was rank, and now it's money that gives a life this bigger dimension. So these stories do have they have a kind of, they're so highlighted. They're almost, in some ways, they're almost like a Hogarthian series of tableaux. Everything starts so wonderfully, and then then of course you also get these other, the ones who rejected all, the Patty Hearst syndrome. The Randolph, the newspaper magnate's granddaughter, who, that famous image of her with a gun in her hand. She joined something called the Symbionese Liberation Army. We don't know the circumstances under which she joined them, but this idea of the heiress openly turning her back on all this stuff, openly acknowledging the realities of inequality and the realities of this burden of guilt that they carry about the almost absurdity of the position they're in. So that obviously that's later, that's the 70s, but but it was trying to trace the procession of, like the one who joined the IRA, Rose Dugdale. She really interested me. I mean, the stories are amazing. They're incredible.
Yeah, they are. And I was going to ask you as a sort of final question, why you actually, because, a portmanteau book of
Mm.
different lives is actually quite a hard thing to write.
Oh,
You're not telling the story of Agatha Christie, or you're not telling the story of Lord Lucan and things like that, which you've done before. I mean, I think you do a brilliant job. But
well, thank you.
what it was an unusual kind of a project for you. Well, why did you choose it?
Well, by accident. I was supposed to be doing something else, which didn't really grab me. And I was reading all the letters of these women that I was supposed to be writing about. And these names kept coming up: Barbara Hutton, Daisy Fellows, um, and then I started thinking about them. I started thinking about Barbara Hutton. And I literally just thought, why was this woman so unhappy? What the hell? You've got the world at your feet, and you're married to Cary Grant, who I think was number 3, was he? And yet you're going to chuck that away for some what? And that was what I wanted to explore. And then the earlier stuff really gripped me. I had no idea about any of that. I
No,
had
that
no
is
idea.
amazing. That social history side of it, and the Gretna Green stuff. I didn't know much about that at all. I mean, it really is a completely new way of telling the story of how, well, family relations and law developed in Britain
Well,
and
that was
elsewhere.
because I was determined to give it some substance. Otherwise, it would just be a story of who owned which yacht, you know, which would be appalling. So I did want it to be a story of the lives of women writ large, as I say. But you're so right about portmanteau books. It's the linking passages that are so damn impossible. How the hell am I going to get from this to this? And finding something that makes that link cogent. You can imagine, you're a writer, you can imagine how horribly, horribly difficult that is.
Well,
But
I think that in reading the way that you've tried to put yourself into their situation and think through I suspect you've thought about these things perhaps more than some of them did, even though they were actually living the life.
well, that was the point. They didn't think about them. And I sort of was thinking, but how do you think about them? Because you literally do not know what it's like not to be in that situation. You do not know. I might dream of a 10 million. You probably need now 100 million at the moment with inflation. What I would do with it? What would I do with it? And they don't ever have. Their life is all. There's no shadow in their life.
Mm.
And I was thinking how awful. That the one who fascinated me as much as any, which was Alice de Janzé, the one who's in the film White Mischief.
Oh, the one who shoots her. No, wait a minute. I'm getting confused now. Does she shoot somebody?
Yeah, she shoots her. She shoots her chap to stop him leaving her or whatever. And then, but she ends up in Kenya in the whole Happy Valley thing, and that thing of her opening the curtains and saying, "Oh Christ, another effing beautiful day." And that seemed like the cri de coeur of these women. And much as I often felt very exasperated by them, I also was really fascinated by this thing that I call the heiress's burden.
Well,
So if I manage to disentangle that at all, and I value your opinion very, very highly.
well, I know you have, and I think it's taking on something that nobody else has ever done, which is, quite rare in our business to find a completely unexplored area. But there's lots of biographies, probably good biographies of all the women in your book, but approaching it from that perspective, with that psychological insight, makes it just so different. And I love it. I totally recommend it.
Oh, that's very nice of you, Phil. Thank you so much. Well, I didn't intend to do that, but that became the way through it. Yeah. So
brilliant. Well, we can talk more when you're at the bar in a couple of weeks. So good to see you. Have a great Christmas.
and you. It's really lovely to see
You must
you.
tell me more. Are you in some beautiful kind of pub? It looks
Is that
like
what my mother?
There's a hotel or something.
No, I'm in my mother's sitting room, and this was an old farmhouse around which, and that's the original bit. That fireplace is what's left of the old sort of barn, really. and then they built a house around it. But that bit is nice, yeah. I don't even know how old it is, but that
what a
it is
lovely
nice.
way to spend Christmas. I hope you enjoy it.
Yes, beside that, yeah, and you. I hope all goes well, Phil.
Thank you.
Send my best to Francis.
I will do, and we'll see you soon.
And I will send you that quote. That is what I must do.
Oh yes, well I'm going to take the opportunity to push my own book because Laura has very kindly spent some time reading it, and apparently it's not that bad. So we'll have to see.
It's superb. It's absolutely superb. You are a bona fide historian, and I am one who is winging it.
No, that isn't true either. I think from my background in television, I'm just a dilettante, like most of the rest of us. I'll talk to you soon.
Happy Christmas.
You too. And to your mum. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I always enjoy my conversations with Laura so much, as I hope you could tell. Last show of the year. Actually, no. What am I talking about? The last show of the year will be next Sunday, the 29th, when Helen Fry is returning. Somebody else who's been on the podcast recently got a very good reaction. Lots of you said bring her back, and she's back. So that'll be the last show of the year, and I think actually that'll be the 100th episode. Maybe I should wear a festive hat or set off some kind of popper or open a bottle of champagne. Who knows? Open a bottle of Madeira or 3. So yeah, but thank you to Laura. I hope the echo wasn't too bad. You may have noticed I was doing this a bit because whenever I spoke, I had a big echo. I could hear her really clearly. Hopefully the producers, the various audio geniuses, genii, the podcast world will make it sound good by the time it reaches you. But thank you again for your company and for watching. And it's funny, just during the course, because usually I record these, I do the introduction after I've done the interview, but today was different. It's all in real time. So I did my introduction, same wearing the same clothes. Then I talked to Laura, and now I'm doing the end of the show. And just in the hour between the introduction and now, various messages flying in on my phone. The health team, the home care team, have been to see my mum, my mother-in-law. They've given her a walker, lots of instructions, a bit of physiotherapy. Apparently she's up and about, moving around her bedroom on her walker, which is amazing because when we got her home only about a day ago, she couldn't bear the pain of standing up. And we had to kind of maneuver her on her wheelchair and kind of half drag her up the stairs. It was very difficult. But that's really good news. What a nice way to end this episode. And also, NHS, maybe I have drifted a little in my politics. Maybe I've become a little bit more conservative. Said this a few times. But thank goodness for the NHS. And we get all this for free, And it's not that it's obviously we pay taxes for it. But the key thing is, and especially if you've got a chronic long-term illness, and various members of my family have, that you can have decades of treatment and never once do you need to worry about this insurance policy, this clause, this argument with the insurer. Did you fill in the form correctly? The excess you have to pay. And that's worth a lot. It's worth a lot in terms of your peace of mind, and certainly in terms of my mother-in-law's peace of mind. Just in the last 24 hours, she had excellent care. Fingers crossed she'll continue to get better. I will update you for when I speak to you again on 29th, which will be the last episode of the year. Thanks for your company today and always. Do keep liking, do keep subscribing. We nudged up again. I think we're now only about only 100 or so from 10,000. Wouldn't it be amazing to get there before the end of the year? It really would. So anyway, if you can, please subscribe. You probably have already. Thanks for your company. See you again very soon. Bye. This has been a Podcast World production. If you want to contact me, write to team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandal Mongers in the heading, or you can reach out via the social media links in the show's bio. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, please consider taking a few seconds to hit the donate button found just below this video. Many thanks, and see you next week.